Welcome back to the Comic Book Historians Podcast. We have great guests today, Mark Ditko and artist storyteller Mort Todd. We're talking about their first official Ditkoverse Indiegogo campaign to bring Steve Ditko's work to fans worldwide. Mark, thank you for being here today.
Good to be here.
And Mort, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
We got DitkoCon coming up September 27th at the Bottle Works Museum in Jonestown, PA, which I'll be there. I'm excited about, and I know you guys are going to be there. This is all kind of in pre-anticipation of that. But Mark, I want to ask you a quick question. I know the Ditko estate, recently reached a settlement with Disney. Confidentiality agreements are in place. I know you can't talk about certain things, but what can you publicly share? Is the family happy with its relationship with Disney at this point?
My official response would be, and it's true. I mean, yeah, we're fine. We're able to just move on. And we're not being held back in any way. And look, I gotta say, Disney and Marvel, has always treated me well, and the family. So I think we're at peace, right now.
Good. Now also some bonuses of that. Kevin Feige. I always say his name wrong. Right? Kevin Feige mentioning that Steve Ditko during the Disney Legend Awards, which you accepted on your uncle's behalf, which was pretty awesome. You made a great speech. And then him saying, the creator, the Steve Ditko, the man who created Spider-Man, who
created Spider-Man, Steve Ditko.
All that was just, surreal and positive. Can you tell us about your experience accepting that Disney Legend Award and talking with him and, Iger in the back and all that stuff?
Well, I'll tell you what, that was surreal. I mean, to have, Kevin call me, before that and us talk on the phone, about what was going to go down, whenever I had, like last, it was San Diego last year or the year before when I was on a panel and I said, hey, who wants to hear a preview of my speech, my draft? And it was quoting Uncle Steve saying that he thought, awards bled artists, and it was really kind of like, Uncle Steve just saying about awards. So anyway, I had a couple of people come up after that, Michael Usland and some others saying, wow, I don't know about saying that, And I said, yeah, well, I mean, they were like, really like, okay, if you're going to say it, like, really, that's not really the forum to have that kind of a downer, But, but what was interesting about that is, it had to be said somehow. And I had found some other quotes that he had said about that. But in the intro, there was somebody else who actually mentioned that. And Kevin called me up specifically to say it had to be said, because he knew who he was. He knew how Uncle Steve felt about that. So Kevin actually called me up and he said he wanted to make sure that that was actually going to be said, that he was really not a big fan of awards and didn't strive for those and on. So, so Kevin knew that, So that was kind of cool to have that conversation with him. And then, of course, before the event, me and my sister Joanna going back into the green room or whatever, with everybody and being able to go up and, kind of talk to Kevin and talk to some others there. So yeah, that was, and then when we got escorted out and I saw the magnitude of that crowd, of that forum, wow. That to me was the stage that kind of thing needed to be presented on and needs to be presented on. Uncle Steve's name, Steve Ditko's name, and that type of the way that was actually presented as, when Kevin as him as the creator and all that, that was just, I couldn't have asked for more, the way that thing went down.
Well, you could have.
Yeah, I could have, but wow. I mean, I was really happy. We were really happy, with that, So, and then the after party, and Mark Hamill's wife came up to me and said, "Oh, I really appreciate you, saying Jack Kirby's name because they were big fans of Jack Kirby
Yeah.
and just that they were getting a platform. Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were getting a platform that they have deserved all along."
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I've seen pictures, I think, with Mark Hamill and Jack Kirby at Comic-Con in the 80s and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Tell us about Ditkoverse and what inspired you to launch these remastered Steve Ditko projects.
Look, Uncle Steve said, and he's been quoted all over the place, that um keep his stuff in print, you know. Robin Snyder has actually printed where he has specifically said that keep his stuff in print. So, you know what? I'm just carrying on that mission. And then um bigger picture, when we were writing back and forth, and I've said this before in other forums, is that he wanted other things to be done. He wanted like Missing Man to be a cartoon. He wanted Static. He wanted a Static movie. He wanted, he had other ambitions for his characters. Well, you know what? I want to stair step to fulfill some of those, ambitions that he had. He actually had ambitions. He said, as far as Mr. A goes, he loved doing him in the past. He loved doing them in the present, and he wanted to see him in the future. So, you know what? To me, I think I've and we were close enough, that I felt that I wanted to be able to honor him by just pushing his stuff and continuing to push his stuff and continuing to give him visibility. And you know what? It aligns with what is happening with the whole bring visibility to artists, and what their role really was in Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, and that they weren't just illustrators, they were they were partly the creators, you know. So yeah, so when I would write to him, I would say, "Hey, how are things going in the Ditkoverse?" So I would kind of start some of my letters like that. So the Ditkoverse to me was always those things that sort of circulated around his world. So that's why to me it was a no-brainer to call, my company anyway, Ditkoverse. But yeah, I'm driven by my relationship with him and the ambitions that he had,
Totally. And now, speaking of premier artist storytellers, Mort Todd, I want to bring some spotlight to Mort because I've been a big fan of Mort for a long time. Had him on the show a few years ago. We did a biographical interview, and he's that indie guy that done good, and the editor in chief of Cracked magazine, and he helped co-start Marvel Music, which was a Marvel Music comic imprint that he did that a rock and roll guy like Mort could actually pull off and pull together. And the funny thing that a lot of people don't know is that corporation of Marvel Music still exists as the music soundtrack for the movies. So it became something different. But Mort, I want to ask you first. You were friends with Ditko. We've talked about that. You guys would talk about old movies together, all sorts of things, and he worked with you over at Cracked. First, what attracted you to joining Ditkoverse as creative director, and how do you see your role in bringing his works to life again?
Well, like you said, I started working with Steve when I was a youngster in like '85. And then by 1990, I had commissioned Steve to do a new Mr. A series. And Steve was like, no one wants to see Mr. A right now. And I was like, come on, let's try it. Let's do it. So we did a few issues. But then when we solicited it to the direct market, the response was pathetic. And back then, before Photoshop, every page of separate color separations, because this is going to be a color book, because I was like, Mr. A's never been in color. You got to have him in color so his white look will stand out from the rest of the world there. So it was before Photoshop, so every page cost $1,000 to color separate. So already that book costs $36,000, and we didn't get enough orders to be able to make it financially viable and stuff. So that always been in the back of my head that like, oh man, it should be printed. And I met Mark through Facebook, and we conversed and everything. And then when Steve passed away, we got deeper into talks about, producing all kinds of Steve stuff. And, to start with, we're working from like black and white art or black and white stats. So I'm recoloring them. And I don't think it's intrusive color. I think it goes along with, what Steve would like. So this is the first book here. And it was what, I put together in the 90s, and it was finally seeing fruition in color. First time it's printed as intended in color. And we even are doing like the super groovy metallic variant cover.
Nice.
And
that's bringing out the 90s comic fan in me right there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So for our first Kickstarter is going on now, and we're doing Mr. A. We have a title called Fantastic Giants, which is going to reprint Conga. And we have Static recolored, which is a real ghastly color. And we're also putting out a new edition of Avenging World, which is...
Yeah, so this is the Fantastic Giants cover. Man, it looks fantastic. Mort can color. As much as I love coloring, Mort can color. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then
that has one movie-length Conga story and 3 shorts from Charlton. And Static has two Static stories, and Killjoy, who's one of my favorite characters. Yeah. Killjoy. In fact, the first time I called Steve, he came right over to my office with his portfolio, and he had the stats for Killjoy. And I said, I'll buy him. And so he probably got paid like 10 times as much than he got at Charlton for drawing it originally. And we were starting to do like 2 color in cracked, like, woo, 2 colors. So we did Killjoy in red and black.
Now, you mentioned Kickstarter. Is this on Kickstarter or is this Indiegogo?
Did I say Kickstarter?
You did.
Yeah.
Indiegogo.
Indiegogo. All right, good. And now, why did you guys choose Indiegogo as the platform for the first campaign, and what makes the timing as important as it is?
Well, it's Mark's birthday for one thing, and
Mort picked that, not me.
But I'd done a bunch of Kickstarters, and I hadn't done Indiegogo before. And when I looked at Indiegogo, I see comic book makers making 6-7 digits on their books. And they're from nowhere, I mean, some of the artists are well known and stuff, but they're not Ditko, And so I think we're coming with an insane brand that most comic fans are aware of, and even people that aren't comic fans. It's like you hear someone that doesn't even like comics go, "Ooh, my spidey sense is tingling," or something, And it's like, I personally can't go a day without seeing someone wearing a Spider-Man T-shirt, or on the background of a TV show, or
in your living room.
Right? It's invaded my home.
Yeah. There's a weird guy in your background, Mort, with a Spider-Man costume. Is he held prisoner there? Who is that?
He got hit by a freeze ray. Yeah. Well, actually, that suit has an interesting story too. Huh? I was working at Marvel, and I was basically consigned to their dungeon, like a floor below the rest of Marvel. But it was sweet because I was left alone. And one day, after a long liquid lunch, there was this big box sitting out in front of my office, and it was full of Spider-Man outfits for like personal appearances and junk. And I'm like, I need one of those.
That's so cool. That's crazy. That looks really legit too. That's wild.
Well, that's why it was, for public appearances for Marvel back in the day and stuff.
Yeah. Now,
I admit I've worn it a few times myself.
What can backers expect in terms of exclusive rewards or special items during this 30-day campaign?
We got some cool shit.
Oh man.
Can I say that? We
Yeah.
have some cool stuff. You can edit that in. Um, I come up with some wacky ideas, and I was like, Bitcoin is real popular.
Oh
Why
yeah.
don't we do a Ditcoin? And Mark was like, I know just the place. I know a place that makes great coins. And so we designed a bunch of coins, and that's going to be one reward. The Mr. A silver coin. It's like 1.5 inches and looks like like a silver dollar or something. And it's got Mr. A on one side, A is A, and his card on the other side.
Well, I
So-
tell you, that working with Mort, it's interesting dynamic. Is he comes up with these ideas, and I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, I'm making that. I don't care if anybody else wants it. So
Yep.
yeah, so we're gonna do these a series of Ditcoins, and what the plan is that obviously they're a collectible by themselves, but then in the future we're gonna actually have them be money that you could trade for even more exclusive merch or stuff that we're doing, or
No
somehow.
one will give up their
Well, we'll
Ditcoin.
see. Yeah, you know what? Just to really let a bigger cat out of the bag. I mean, we're gonna have three. There's three coin denominations now, coming out, that are shortly here in my hands. Mr. A, a gorilla one for conga, and static.
It's so
Yeah,
cool. I'm
yeah,
excited about that.
yeah. And then of course, that we have the Mr. A cards, and the Mr. A the pins, the black and white pins, the Mr. A cards. So yeah, we're the merch stuff, we're gonna supplement that out there just to kind of keep everybody, being able to display and proudly display the Ditko love. But really the focus is really going to be about trying to just getting his stuff reprinted out there in a remastered way at a quality level that it really deserved,
Yeah.
and that's to me is something that is way high on my list. Is the quality has to match who he was as an industry person.
Oh yeah.
Well,
That's gonna be great.
he's created at least two of the most famous icons in the world between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Those movies make $1 billion each. So people are already, a little familiar with them. But yeah, we want to make it
Yeah.
incredible.
As top notch as he was.
Yeah, exactly.
You're introducing works. You mentioned some Mr. A, Lost Adventures, Static, and Fantastic Giants. Why start with these specific titles, and what makes them stand out in Ditko's catalog?
Well, like I said, the Mr. A hadn't been printed before in color, so I thought that was important to get out and introduce people to Mr. A. Down the road, we'll start collecting the original stories and stuff, and static, of course, because comics are like a superhero market for the most part. So, I wanted to include him, and also with Conga Monsters, another Ditko, thing that he can do really well. And all those books, we had original art or black and white stats. So it was really easy to color. Whereas, down the road, we'll reprint from old books. But, we're looking into this guy as well as myself that clean up old pages and make them white. The white's white and the black's black. So Steve would like that.
That's true. Now, and more on that in a second. Can you tell us more about Avenging World and how it fits into this lineup of releases?
Well,
It's
I
the
think
Bible.
yeah, that's just it. Yeah, Mark can. It is Mark's Bible for sure, and it also is like Steve's 10 Commandments as well. You read this book and you know where his head is at. And what is so wild is how prescient it is. It was done in like 68 or 72 or something. But he talks about topics. And back then, people go like, whoa, Ditko's got the tinfoil hat on too tight or something, But you read it now and you're going like, who was talking
Yeah.
about social justice back then, or all kinds of other topics? And so it's a very timely book, as well as crawling deep into the head of Steve Ditko.
You know what? I love that book so much that every time I see it for sec, because I go jump on eBay and I kind of surf around and kind of see what's available and stuff on the older books. I have my own collection, but some books to me just speak to me so loudly that I can't. I have to buy every one I see. You know, and I probably have 40 of those, the originals, just because I just love that book. And that's the book that anytime anybody says, if I meet up with someone, they come over to the house and they go, wow, Steve Ditko, what's Mr. A all about? Or what's this? It's just like, read this, and I'm handing those things out just because, those are the things that if you really want to understand, the point of view that he had, how sort of a social visionary he was, that's the book. So that we originally didn't have that in the lineup of this campaign, and then Mort was like, hey, this is crazy, but could we have that in there? And I was like, oh yes, yes, definitely.
And we have a cool variant cover for that as well,
Yeah,
that Mark approves of and
yeah,
wants a good T-shirt of. And I mean, speaking of the variants, I mean, most of them have like metallic backgrounds, but for Fantastic Giants, we're offering a personalized cover
yeah.
as a reward to the person that buys it, can have their name on it. What it is a drawing of Conga that Steve did like in the 80s or something and mailed to Mark.
Yeah,
And so it says, what does it say? Hey, Mark, you still monkeying around?
yeah, yeah.
So we took the mark out, and whoever picks that as a reward, we'll put their name in it.
How fun. That's
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah.
Mort, can you walk us through your restoration process? Like, what are the steps you took? You've mentioned a little bit of it to ensure these comics remain true to Steve Ditko's original vision. And are there challenges in updating and remastering classic artwork for a modern audience?
Well, for like these Mr. A books, um, I had black and white stats of them, so I didn't have to really clean up the art except here and there if there was specs or whatever. But I did re-letter the books as well because Steve when his independent stuff, he would letter it a lot, and it was for convenience for him, and save money. But that is one of the slight criticisms I've heard from people is his lettering. And so I relettered the Mr. A books and we showed them to Diamond, and Diamond was, oh, thank God you did that. That looks so much better. So did that. And then, the color was just done in Photoshop after I scanned the stats.
Mark, how do you balance the family's preservation efforts with delivering fresh, appealing editions for new readers?
You know what? Anybody that knows me, anybody that's talked to me, I'm on a singular mission, just to get his stuff out there. I mean, I am so driven by that. I have put so many things aside. I have just shoehorned this activity into my life, every nook and cranny. So to me, the passion to just get this stuff out there at any cost, at the quality that it should be, you know, we are, look, to be honest, we're hoping to have a pretty successful campaign that is going to launch us into being able to do a lot of other things. And what's happening is anything that we get from these campaigns is going right back into the next project and the next project and the next project. So the master plan is that this is one why we want this first campaign to really be successful. Is we know that as successful as this could be is what is going to launch and continue these campaigns. And we have some things going on simultaneously. It's been 6.5 years since he passed away, and there's really nothing substantial that's been released. So to me, I feel like we're really, really behind the eight ball. So right now, I'm in, fifth gear at high RPMs, just trying to get stuff out there as fast as I can, as much as I can. And I'll, look, this is me at any cost. I just want it to be right. It needs to be right. It needs to be the quality it deserves. And I know, look, we have our fingers crossed, and Mort gives me his rah 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 every now and then. It's like we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. And the love of Steve Ditko is going to help us, drive all these projects forward. So, yeah, I'm all in on this, and at any cost. Um, I wanted to I wanted to I want to do for him what hadn't been done, in his, last decades of his life that should have been done.
Yeah. Well, let me say about Mark is that he has a real job, unlike me. He's got a real job. So for him to be able to squeeze all this stuff in, because I'll call him up and go like, "Oh, we got to do this, we got to do that," and he'll like, "Okay, okay," but I know it's a lot of work for him. And also talking about the family, Mark was really the only one that grew up being a comic fan. So he is very suitable for this project. He knows what comics are. And he corresponded a lot with his uncle and talked about comics and junk. So, I don't think there's anyone better to spearhead this whole project than Mark. There isn't. There just isn't.
Now, I will say that, my cousin Rick and Eric, those guys were very much into comics as well, and they read them and they corresponded with Uncle Steve. So, I really wasn't, super special in that respect, but I may have written to him the most about comics specifically, and probably followed his philosophy and read every book that he gave me. And, so there are other family, especially, and I'll just say, Rick Russack and Eric, those guys absolutely did, follow comics, and they read comics, and they know, who's who. I think maybe the only thing that I did was I got to Comic Cons, and I'm out there and I'm really talking the talk, and I'm writing more to Uncle Steve about comics, and just connected. I feel like I connected pretty strongly with him philosophically. And I think my philosophical connection with him just made the comics things more natural, between he and I.
Yeah, and whenever Mark goes to cons, he's comic book royalty. They're like, blah, blah, blah. Ditko! Your
Yeah.
name's Ditko!
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. Mort, in what ways do you see your editorial and creative experience shaping the presentation of Ditko's work? You've talked about, the remastering process. You've talked about relettering, but what percent or parts of this is Mort Todd? What percent or parts of this is Ditko? How would you go about thinking about this as far as shaping the material?
Right. Well, I was always a hardcore Ditko fan. And, as I've said, he was the first person I called when I became editor in chief to do some work at Cracked and stuff. So, I've always wanted to do more work with Steve. We did like Skyman comic in the 80s and a few other things. So when I left Cracked, I was like, let's do Mr. A. And that was one of my big disappointments in life that it never came out. And so now I am super glad to be doing this stuff. And beyond the comics, we're going to have some editorial pages that'll give background on the characters and on Steve and stuff like that. Because as a kid, I always loved Stan's bullpen, or the way Forey Ackerman wrote for famous monsters and junk. So at Kraken with my monster magazines, and even at Marvel when I did horror reprints, I would just try to connect with the readers the same way that I felt part of the group when I was a little kid.
Alex, I can't tell you how many times that Mort and I have talked where he said, Steve would like this, or your uncle, this is what your uncle would probably do. Or this is, he looks at
Or
things.
wouldn't do.
Yeah, or right, that's right. So he really does, and what obviously, why I consider he's kind of the right industry muscle, for this project, these projects, is that he sees things through a Steve Ditko lens, and I've never really heard anybody talk like that before. So that to me, again, it makes the fit just right.
For listeners who might only know Steve Ditko from the mainstream Marvel titles that you mentioned, right? Spider-Man, and Doctor Strange, and he also made the transformation of the Hulk Anger instead of Nighttime, which was the original Jack Kirby Stan Lee model, and then he also redesigned Iron Man's outfit, which is the outfit we see now. He did a lot, for Marvel. What would you want them to understand about his broader body of work outside of Marvel? And that also implies, what do you guys each find the most compelling about Ditko's storytelling or his artistic philosophy outside of Marvel?
Well, I think he had a lot more freedom with self-publishing. He was one of the pioneers of, doing independent self-publishing books. I mean, he didn't publish them, but they were like a little before the undergrounds. A lot of people like Wally Wood and other people were putting out their own magazines. So outside of Marvel and DC, Steve could do projects that he felt strongly about, that with characters that imbued his philosophy and stuff. Because, Steve would turn down stories from Marvel and DC because, he'd reject the fact that the cops were corrupt or something like that, So when he could do Mr. A or tons of other stuff, I think it was a lot more personal, and his philosophy shined through. And we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of those pages of, his independent work that he's did for like 50 years.
Alex, is just as far as his kind of like his style and his, kind of the artistic slant, I have to say that's, I don't want to say it's secondary, but it is secondary. I mean, to me, as a family member and as his philosophy, and just the impact that he made, I want people to understand, who he did. But I'll tell you, things like what he did at Warren, or even, at DC, Creeper, Hawk and Dove, and all that stuff. His philosophy kind of threads through that. But I'll have to say, for me, one thing that I have kind of a pet project going on now that we're doing kind of simultaneously with all this is, and I had mentioned it on Facebook probably last year sometime, is you notice that people have been posting his splash pages. So one day I was going through his file copies that he sent me, and this to me is what's really kind of impactful, that makes I don't know, where my uncle is making statements, and he sends me all of his file copies, and they're just those like 5 pagers or whatever, just torn out, and I have them in a backing board and a sleeve, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So I'm going through them, and I'm just taking them out, and all I'm doing is I'm looking at the splash page, and just at some point I'm just like captivated and absolutely immersed in just staring at a page, how he's telling a story in that one splash page. And I'm just in awe of, and one after another after another. So we have a project going on now that hopefully will come out relatively soon, is Steve Ditko making a splash. And it's going to be just a book of his splash pages. And to me, I that to me is, if somebody wants to really understand him as an artist, as a creator, as an illustrator,
Yeah.
as someone who could tell a story in a panel.
Yeah,
Those
that would be the one. Yeah.
amazing,
It's
amazing.
interesting because splash pages, covers, even like the golden age of illustration and paintings, there's a lot to be said, even like magazine covers, Warren magazine covers where they were painted. It's all about telling multiple points of story in time, in one moment in time. And that's not easy. And it's something you have to kind of pre-anticipate and think about. And I think that's what Ditko really did. He pre-anticipated and thought about like everything around him and those splash pages, even his panels. I mean, everything speaks to that effect, and I think that's wonderful. That's such a smart idea.
The comic book covers are like movie posters,
Yeah.
and that's what first draws you in. You open it up and see the splash page. Splash page is the trailer. It's like a movie trailer.
Oh.
And you don't even have to go through the whole book. Like, I don't know if people do that today, but when we were kids, you go, oh, and you'd open up and look at the splash page. And go, oh, I got to buy this.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it makes an entrance, right? That you can't, that it pulls you in. Yeah, that's true. I haven't quite looked and see if I read some new stuff occasionally, but I haven't really looked at that as a pattern. Now, what are your guys' thoughts on how social media and crowdfunding have changed the way fans interact with and support creators and their legacies?
Oh, you know what? I'll throw in first here on this. I initially, when I was looking at and considering doing projects just in my own head, I never I never wanted to do crowdfunding. Never. That to me was that just meant that just meant you were nobody. That means you couldn't get it together without somebody else's money, you know? Well, now I see, after talking to a lot of people and going to a lot of panels with some very intelligent creators, you know, it's an outlet. It is a way to get things out there and visible. If you
And it goes viral too. It's not like,
right, right.
you don't have to go to a comic shop and see 1,000 new books and go like, where is it? What do I want? Like with this, you can focus and you go like, okay, I'll take it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had love hate with comic shops, basically since they killed Mr. A in 1990. But because it seems like when we were kids, comics were everywhere. Every newsstand, supermarket, airport, you name it, there were comics. And then when they started going direct sales, the print runs went to, nothing compared to what they did on the newsstand. But it was guaranteed money for the publishers and for everybody. There was no returns, so you didn't have to deal with all that grief. But I think it's limited the market, that people just don't see comic. There have been times when people said to me like, oh, they still make comic books? Because you don't see them unless you go to a comic shop and everything. So with the crowdsourcing, I think you just get a lot more exposure. And like with our videos and stuff, people can, link it on Facebook or other socials and stuff like that. So it's an opportunity that, even big publishers didn't have back in the day and stuff.
Yeah, to me, it's the marketing. It's the marketing piece that I wouldn't have known how to distribute, this stuff prior to that. So, we're not. It's almost like there's it was always. I think, and this was my mentality, is initially it was a way to actually get the project done. Well, now we're done. You know what? I'm doing it regardless. So now it's just a way to get it out in people's hands, and get people aware of it. So it's almost like we've sort of flipped it. It was always the horse was money pulling the cart of the books. Well, now it's really the books are done, the cart is done, and it's really putting the cart before the horse stuff. And now it's just a mechanism to get it into people's hands, where otherwise I wouldn't have known how to do it without social and without that kind of thing. We would have had a limited distribution.
Well, naturally, we do want to get into comic shops. I mean, come on. So part of it is with these Kickstarters, we'll have an inventory of books. So that and we have been talking with distributors and they're very excited, like about Ditko and stuff. So, once we have an inventory of books, we can go to comic shops and do like 2 books a month or something. And also we're leading up to 2027, which would have been Steve's 100th birthday. So we're celebrating that, and we've got a banner on all our books and everything, and we really want to push that and get him, in the spotlight again where he deserves to.
D100 and future plans. You mentioned this is part of a D100 series. leading up to Steve Ditko's 100th birthday. Can you elaborate on your vision for future releases, celebrations? I know you talked about, the Making a Splash book, but beyond this initial outing and these works that you're putting out, what do you hope Ditkoverse will accomplish in the next few years?
Me personally, one, I just want to get the highest volume of his material out there as possible, and I think, when that D100 idea kind of came up, which was probably Mort's, that that it was just uh, a sort of a natural thing to kind of shoot for. But for me, it was um, it was a deadline that I now kind of had to sort of achieve. Had we started 6 years ago, we would have
Oh
a body
boy.
of material already out. But now this D100, that gets put in front of us and go, wow, now we need to really amp it up. So to me, it's an accelerant, for one. So the goal for me is to get as much material out there as possible, but also very important material. Like we want to have collected essays. We want to get everything he wrote out there. So I think to me, it's a fire that sort of will drive certain people to get things out there. Plus, it's this brings awareness to who Steve Ditko was, and we want to continue to kind of heighten this awareness of Steve Ditko, who he was, what he created, his importance, and kind of what he did in the industry, how he contributed. So, and hopefully, it reaches some crescendo, in 2027, and then it goes from there, and it continues on from there.
We've scheduled about 48 releases between now and the end of 2027. So, unfortunately, with the crowdsourcing, we can only do that really quarterly, because you got you have the campaign and then you got the fulfillment, and that's roughly 3 months. So, we certainly don't want to start another campaign until we get all our rewards out for the first one. So what it's looking like is like in a year, we'll have like 16 books while we're still working on more books.
Yeah.
So that once we get into comic shops, we can put out, because I don't think it's worth putting out one book a month. I'd like to see at least two. We could possibly do more than that too, but
Right.
we'll see.
And that makes sense. Why, if for a quarter, if that's 3 months, you kind of knock out three or four things. I mean, I think that's perfect. And it sounds like also this builds, as new ones come out, you can also utilize maybe some inventory from a previous one, and then it all kind of builds on itself in some way.
We'll do trade paperback collections and stuff like that, and probably even some hardcovers.
But I'll tell you one thing that I'm kind of feel like I'm bringing to the table a bit is, I've been running my own business now for, 25 years. And one of the things that is sort of a cornerstone of my business is I am very snappy about getting stuff done, and with my clients in my engineering business, consulting business, when someone needs something, I literally I will start regardless of all the other stuff I have going on. I will start that day, on something if someone is really in a pressure pot. So I have the ability to just accelerate things and to really just turn up the heat internally, and get stuff done. So, Mort, we have a plan, but look, my intention is to accelerate everything. I feel like I'm kind of behind, so I am throwing as much acceleration internally, on this. So we're going to turn this stuff around. Look, I could say, and I am gonna attempt, once these campaigns are done, I'm going to turn those books around and get it into people's hands as fast as possible. And hopefully, we're going to set a pattern of being able to turn stuff around after a campaign is done faster than anybody can. So
Yeah, I already have two more books fully done for the next campaign, and so
I just want to say, we have a schedule, but my intention is to beat that schedule.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I love it. I love the passion that you guys clearly have. I mean, it definitely matches, the passion that fans like me have, to consume that material, right? So that's really wonderful. And so now, personal connection, reflection. Mark and Mort, collectively Mork. Is there
Ooh,
is there a
I've been called that before.
no? That was your idea.
Yeah.
Is there a personal story about Steve Ditko that you both would individually, take turns, but individually would like to share? One that might give fans a deeper sense of who he was beyond the page.
I had offered to take Steve out to dinner many times or lunch, whatever. He was just never interested. And, and like we'd have like anniversary parties for the magazine or whatever. And, he wouldn't show up. But one day, my art director and I went to the Burger King around the corner, and we get our order. We went there because they had like superhero cups. So I was getting it back. So, and this was a 2-story Burger King. So we go upstairs, and we we hear like, "Hey, Mort," and I turn around and it's Steve. And this was like 2 blocks from his house. I mean, from his studio. And he lived over this place called Hamburger Harry's, which had like, back then, $12 hamburgers, which was like insane, right? So we see him at Burger King, and he's like, "Have a seat." And, because we didn't want to intrude and everything, but he's like, "Have a seat." So I finally had that lunch with him. And then like this other Marvel editor showed up and just stood and hung around, and Steve didn't offer him to sit down at all, which I thought was pretty funny. And but the most amusing thing, when he ate his burger, he kept it in the wrapper. And I realized, you know what? That's what wrappers are for, so you don't get all greasy. When have you ever seen anyone eat it in a wrapper outside a Jughead in the 1950s, maybe, or something? But he usually had a platter of them. So anyway, so he's eating his burger with the wrapper, and I don't know if I can even do it. He was eating it like this, with the burger. And I was like, wow. So I have since adopted eating a burger in a wrapper. I don't do the finger thing, but it just makes sense. It's a logic from an era, when there was logic, as opposed to now. It's just like, oh, get my burger all over
Right.
me.
Right. We've degraded as a society a little bit. Yeah, that's interesting. So he's making Spider-Man Doctor Strange hands while he's eating his wrapped burger, Archie Jughead style.
I
That's really
think that's
funny.
why I would draw hands like that, because I find the same thing. Because like I sometimes can do like Gil Kane type hands or something,
Yeah.
And I find when I draw that you draw what you know. So
yeah, I like the hand thing you did though. It was very spidery. It matched the costume in the background. Mark, you're part of the Mork entity also.
Oh my God! I hope that doesn't catch on.
And so now you could tell us a personal story with him that you feel gives fans, more of a concept of the man behind the page.
Well, I'll make it very concise, and there's something to me that is illustrative of who he was, or at that time, through his life. He was always supportive of people, and I have stories on and on of people who told me how supportive he was. But to me, one real good illustration of who he was everyone has seen the pictures. Anybody that sees pictures of him in the 60s, he's always had on his light, think. So that was a part of, people put that together, with him. He had that think mentality, and everything, all our correspondence, and you just look, he was a guy that he was a thinker, and it was really just a statement to himself and to others to, when you do something, just like use your head. So what was interesting is going to his studio when we cleaned it out, me and my dad and my brother, Patrick. I was kind of thinking, well, is this what's gonna, where's this think you know, but he didn't. So he didn't have that, but he had something else. Is he had an index card on his desk, right there, sort of prominently displayed, and it said, "Never give up." So what was interesting to me is that's what, he started out, when he's in the thick of things in the 50s and 60s, and he's, it's like think, make sure he's like on the right track and focusing on what he's doing the best he can. Well, over time, what he ended up sort of as his mantra, so to speak, probably, was don't give up. Like never give up. And it was never, I have the index card, right over here. It's never give up. So
Let's do that as a variant cover.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, that to me is a very, very strong message of actually who he was. And this is now he's, in his early 90s, and that's his attitude. Never
Right.
give up. And I gotta say, I that not too much time goes by that I don't, be driven. I'm not driven by that.
Right.
When challenges come up, and look, this world's not necessarily an easy world to live in these days, especially if you're trying to be produce something and get something out, and you have people who aren't going to necessarily make your life easy, and some do, and you have your own internal struggles. So to me, I fall back on that mantra, never give up. Just keep going. Just keep going and just push through it. So to me, that would be the message that I would always, and I say this in my panels and stuff. I want that's the message I want people, to take away with Steve Ditko. He's telling you, don't give up, persist, keep going, go for that goal.
Well, to follow up on that, I think a lot of Steve's more personal comics make the reader think,
Hmm.
because a lot of times he'll have a topic and you'll go, what? Because, like, when I was a little kid, like, you could only get these books through mail order, they didn't have comic shops, they weren't on the newsstand. I remember getting Avenging World and reading it and going, like, gosh, what's so wrong with the UN? And like being like, oh, come on, the UN, that's like USA Junior. You can't be against the UN. And then I'm reading it and it's like, yeah, the UN sucks.
Huh. That's funny. I think my only thing that I knew about the UN as a kid was from the Batman 66
When
thing.
they got dehydrated.
They got dehydrated into powder, and I'm like, what? No, those are the good guys. God damn it! And then, and then, yeah, and then of course times change. You get older, you find out other stuff. But back then, that's what I knew
But
about the UN.
knew it in the early 70s, obviously, and and put it out in his work. He thought it was important enough to draw it, get it printed, and get it distributed. And like I said, a lot of those, like the black and white Mr. A comic #1, they were only available through mail order, so you
Yeah,
had to be a Ditko fanatic. And in fact, Mark is giving up some of his prized Mr. A #1s as rewards for the Kickstarter from 1973.
nice.
Uh, and he's also offered to sign a few of them too. So it wouldn't be a Steve Ditko signature, but it'd be a Mark Ditko signature, and he can forge Steve's style pretty good. So
It sounds like, if I'm understanding this right, this is kind of its own venture. Anything that Robin Snyder does with stuff that he did with Ditko is a separate thing, right? So these are like different kind of presentations. Is that am I thinking about this
yeah,
right?
well, like you said, they're remastered. Like
Right, of course.
a lot of this stuff has never been printed in color,
Right.
and a lot of it hasn't been seen by people because it was only again through mail order and stuff. There
Right.
were
And
a few
it
shops.
has that Mort Todd like restoring an original artistic intent, which you have an eye for. But it sounds like these are different, ventures, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This
Yeah.
is something that's totally independent of what Robin's doing. I want to push this to I'll just say a much more appropriate quality level and presentation level in terms of packaging. And this is stuff that's coming from the family, you know. So this is, to me, this is an extension of, if he was publishing this stuff himself, by himself, this is the way that I would see that he would be doing this.
Yeah, yeah. Like in a way that but taking care of the kind of annoying stuff that he probably wouldn't may not have been able to do on his own, but actually realizing like maybe what his mind wanted this stuff to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to get this out as, look, and he hated this, but the Ditkos, we have, and I'd throw Mort in there just in terms of our expectation of quality, you
Yeah.
know, we it needs to match, the name.
Ditko family. They're very nice people.
Yeah.
I got to know a few of them very well. Most importantly is, Mark's paterfamilias. His dad was such a cool guy. I really enjoyed talking with him. And the best part was, when we had meetings and I said something that cracked him up, he laughed just like Steve. And, it was like a super throwback.
Oh, really? That's awesome. I know that laugh
Oh.
because you guys know I spent a weekend with him and Patrick, and I slept over at his house, and
Is that cool or what?
it
That
was
place,
so
he
much
built it himself.
fun. And he built it, yeah, spirals in it. It's very Doctor Strangey anyway. So there's
Yeah,
like some
well,
family
yeah.
trait, some gene in
Oh,
that
they're all
Ditko
artists.
thing that comes out in these ways.
And
But
the view,
very
and the
Ditko.
view from that place. Wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And the great big tree that made it into one of Steve Ditko's stories.
Did you see the Indian painting? I didn't know if it was in the garage then, but like,
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah,
Steve penciled it and Patrick painted it.
yeah. No, I saw it.
Los Bros Ditkos.
Yeah. And yeah, we were downstairs in that den, and the talked for a long time. I loved his talk about westerns and movies, and it was funny. We had this fun discussion where I was really breaking down, the timeline of westerns. Like they're from like 1840 to like 1920, and they're everything in between is westerns, and different westerns fit on a timeline of when. Right. And he was like, "Huh." Now that's interesting. Like he was like, that's a weird way to put that, Like he thought that he was like, huh? And I was like, yeah, because before 1840, that's like the it's like the East Coast. What was like what was it? The pioneers. That's pioneer at that point, and now westerns here, and then it ends at when World War I ends. Like that's it for westerns, and he was like, yeah, okay. He just really, we had a really fun thing with westerns. And
some westerns even go back to revolutionary times because
that's true.
Like Last of the Mohicans and junk like that.
It's not an exact science, but and also there's some westerns that, well, there's a Paul Newman one. I forgot what it was called, HUD or something, but that was like 1950s western technically. So it doesn't always fit like that.
Right.
Just a lot of them.
You got like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers too, and they're driving around cars and airplanes and all that stuff. So
right.
My dad definitely loved watching those.
Oh yeah, I mean and the Native American stuff he liked, and the cowboy stuff like
you saw his totem pole and stuff.
Yeah, right. Like he was just it was just interesting to see that kind of old school stuff, and then thumbing through Steve Ditko's video collection, like there were westerns in that too, and you could just see them as young boys watching that stuff and loving that stuff. So
strangely, Steve didn't draw many westerns. I can't think of many, and I think they were at Charlton. He actually did. I don't know if you ever seen this cover for Cheyenne Kid of the Battle of Bighorn.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's got this giant profile of an Indian on the right side, and then like people just fighting and killing in the background. It is beautiful. Yeah. And I know someone who has a black and white stat of that from Charlton, and I want to color it.
That's awesome.
That's another thing. When I see like black and white Ditko pages, I must color that.
Yeah. How cool. It's like a compulsion. This sounds like the perfect project for you guys. For those listening who want to support the Indiegogo campaign, where can they find it, and what should they do first?
Oh, I would suggest going to Ditkoverse.com and the links will be there because I'm not sure when this is getting streamed, but we're launching it Sunday night. Well, actually Monday morning on the 7th of Mark's birthday. Happy birthday, Mark! So we don't have the exact link yet, but by tomorrow, Monday the 7th, we launch, and we'll have the link at ditkoverse.com.
Yeah, I love the motion comic you put together that you showed me. It's full of all this Ditko goodness, juiciness to it. Real juicy.
I want to do a full Avenging World motion comic.
Oh, man, I would love that.
Or Mark wouldn't mind. Well, I hope everyone who sees this, goes to the Ditkoverse and the Indiegogo, and perhaps even more importantly, is to share the links. Like, if you can't afford to join, to contribute, you could share the links and to it on your socials, and that I think would be very helpful. And thank you in advance, everyone who does.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, and all I would say is just, let everybody know that anybody that contributes to this in any way, financially, they just understand, yes, you're going to get something very nice out of it, good quality, but primarily it's really helping us for the next campaign and the next campaign and the next release and the next release.
We're not going to do a campaign until we have the books in finished, because here's like the mystery and everything, and this is the prototype printing, but
I love that.
Like I said, we will never start a campaign without having the books in the can, because I know that's a big problem with a lot of crowdsourcing. It's like a lot of people want to try and raise money to pay for the books. We're doing it just basically to pay for the printing.
Yeah. So just, again, just to kind of recap that, it's, yes, you're going to contribute to that specific campaign, but just understand that everything that you do is helping us do the next project and the next project and the next project. So just think, it's not just about this campaign. You're helping us do the future ones.
Yeah, with the ultimate goal, too, of getting on the newsstand. And,
yep.
Well, I say newsstand, but comic shops definitely. But we are looking into alternative distribution so that we can get them into the
places.
Big
map. Help us out.
When we were youngins.
I love it. All right. Well, I'm excited. I'm definitely going to buy that stuff because I just love what you showed there. And I've always loved Mort's, color sensibility anyway. So to see that with Ditko, that's like the best PB&J sandwich I could eat. So I really appreciate everything you guys are doing, the mission equality. Thanks for being here today. I'm excited to get this interview out there.
Yep. All right.
Thank you so much for having us and helping us get the word out. We really appreciate it, Alex.
Yeah.
Because you've got a following. You're an influencer. And, and I think people are going to be like, Ditko, what's that? I'll have to look at it.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I could say is I have a mission of quality for everything I put my hands on. I'm always going to make sure that it comes out with the shiniest appeal with what I have at my disposal. Anyway.
Yeah. All right, Alex. Thanks.